Okay. All right, so welcome, my friends, to week 8. So in your notes, week 8 in CIT15. So the first thing I want to say, and many of you have already experienced this, but on the lab test, okay, do know you can do what? You can take it as many times as you want. You can resubmit. So when you do the work and you submit, you do view submissions to see what? What you missed. And then you can re-upload again. You don't have to do all the work again. You can just re-upload that file with the corrections. Okay? Keep that in mind for the next lab test. Okay? But overall, you know, obviously everyone didn't do as well as you do on the exams, on the assessments, right? This exam, because it required you to go out there and do something. But here's the deal. You want to do well on these things, right? It really tells you how well you're translating the simulation into real world. So I've already said this, but week hands-on is our last CSS, and it's already out there and available. So this is our topic for the day, okay? So we're going to talk about today one of my favorite stories, because it really is my own experience as well in computers. And it's the story of, and how many know this first term? The GUI. Yeah, the graphical user interface. Really, it's a story of the PC. And when we say PC, people think we mean Windows. But it's not. When you say PC, it means any personal computer, okay? And what's that last term? Operating system. Very nice, okay? So when I you know, it's like when I was a kid, had to walk 10 miles in the snow. Okay, when I was young and first started in computers, this is how we interact with computers. And this is called, anybody know? Oh, good, command line. So in your notes, command line interface. This is the way when, you know, and you have to think about what computers were like before they were personal, right? They were really only for big businesses and big universities, you know, and people that had a lot of money. It really wasn't meant for personal computers. So this transformation that we're talking about is from industry, you know, institutionalized computers to individual computers. So here's an example. I'm actually on my Mac today. Right? So if you're in just go to the screen so they can see this a little bit. And this is called the terminal, but on Windows it's called the command line. And so if you want to do something, you issue, oh, sorry, I always forget because I'm either in Windows. If I'm in Windows and I want to see a list of files, I do dir. And if I'm in my Mac, which actually this is Linux. So if you drop down into the command line, this is Linux. And so you issue commands. So how intuitive is it to have to remember commands to want to do anything? What do you think? Is it easy or hard to remember to do commands? Depends on how many they are. But think about this, right? So let me go back here, because the alternative here is what got created, which is called the graphical user interface. This is very intuitive, right? You can click. Right? And what's even more intuitive than the graphical user interface is the touch interface. You ever seen a kid pick up a tab or an iPad and how quickly they can know what to do? That's because it's intuitive. So we're really moving from least intuitive to more intuitive to most intuitive that we have today. So the most intuitive right now would be touch. What's the next step of this, by the way? To where you can control it with your mind. Which, by the way, do we already have technology out that does this? Yeah. So this mind-controlling technology is something that is actually already being used for people that are quadriplegic, and they can control their wheelchairs and other things with their mind. But again, we're talking about the way we interface with computers, okay? So starting out, when I was a kid, right, starting in computers, it was here. Now, by the way, this was awesome, because when I got into computers, it'd be like I actually got my first job when I was in college, and it was being a consultant, and people would call me out just because they'd forgot the commands. So for me, it was awesome. It's like, oh, just remember a command. It's cool, right? So, but from an interface standpoint, it's definitely a big change. And we're going to talk about, by the way, even before we say this, who do you think created? And you might try to guess based on the pictures, but don't. Who created the graphical user interface? Who? People think Windows, when really, if you say Windows, what company are you talking about? Microsoft. Not true. Not IBM. Steve Jobs, that's the other guess, not true. No, not Bell Labs. Okay, good. This will be a new story for you. So let's talk about the players. So in your notes, first we talked about the command line interface. So put that in your notes versus the what? Graphical user interface. So here are the major players that impacted how this happened, okay? So here we have, by the way, anybody know either of these characters? 1976? Wasn't even thought of. Okay, maybe some of you I was thought of, but yeah, it was Apple. And the first guy is Steve Jobs, and the second guy is Steve Wozniak, which, by the way, little tidbit, Steve Wozniak's going to be in Fresno next week. And I have a ticket, which I had already put on chat, that if anybody wanted them. So I still have one or two. So if you want them, you will need to talk to me today. But anyway, huh? How old is he? I think Woz is probably around 55 in the 60s. He was on Dancing with the Stars over the last couple of years, but he's no longer with Apple. But check this out. And by the way, if you can see it, what kind of OS are they building here? It's harder. Yeah, there you go. What do you think that is? Is that graphical user or is that command line? Command line. You can tell just by the lines itself, right? So these guys, they met very young, right? And it was really Woz who was the geek. Jobs was the marketer, right? So, and yeah, you can't just by looking at the guy, right? So here, first player is, then we call him Apple, but it's these two guys started this company, okay? And by the way, Wozniak was working for HP at the time him and Jobs met, and they basically worked out of their house and built Apple from out of their garage. True story. There's actually a house that's now a museum. You can go visit for that. All right, here's the other guys. Anybody know these guys? A very young Bill Gates. And probably nobody knows the other guy. The guy that helped Bill Gates, Paul Allen. Paul Allen, right? Paul Allen actually owns almost all he developed the technology where we can read the DNA now. But these guys, this is crazy, but true, dropped out of Harvard to go start a company because they were so excited by this idea of a computer for individuals, okay? So we have two parties now. We have Apple and ultimately who became Microsoft. Now, here's the one nobody knows, and it's called Xerox. And if you know them, you only know them by their copiers, right? They created copiers. Oh God, this part of the story is really kind of sad, but true. So the image here really depicts a bunch of people sitting around in beanbag chairs, but really Xerox took some of the smartest people in the country at the time, put them together, and they said, build something. So they did, okay? And that thing that they built was the graphical user interface. Now, why don't we all, instead of using Windows, use Xerox? Well, that's the story we're about to tell you, okay? So we have three players. We have one more player that I kind of made fun of here. Well, but really, who's the company? IBM, okay? Which, by the way, when I was first out of college, that's who I wanted to work for. You know, but I didn't because I wasn't smart enough, and that's okay. They required a huge GPA and a master's, and at the time I didn't have it. But IBM, right, they're known for what? Typewriters? Yeah, not really. I mean, who has a typewriter anymore, okay? Software and hardware, really, okay? Are they? Okay, so who are our four players? Are Apple, Microsoft, Xerox, PARC. That's the important part of that, okay? Because Xerox, but PARC was where they got all the smart people together, okay? Now, those are our players. So let's start with Apple, right? So, I mean, I kind of told you a little bit of this, but, you know, Steve Woz and Steve Jobs met, kind of goofed around. There's actually a really good movie if you want to watch it called The Pirates of Silicon Valley. Anybody ever seen it? If you haven't watched it, I definitely recommend it. It really shows their early age, or when they were young, and the kind of stuff they were doing, like drugs and, you know, and just really having a good time and doing crazy stuff like figuring out how to call the Pope because they figured out this thing called a whistle that could bypass the long distance codes. It's crazy. But eventually Woz was like, I'm going to build a computer, right? And so he did. But he was working for HP at the time, and he had to ask HP, hey, do you guys care if I go build a computer? Guess what HP said? No, we don't think anybody, and this actually is a theme you'll see, we don't think individuals are going to need computers. We call that short-sightedness. Okay, so ultimately they created Apple out of their garage, and this was one of their first commercial products, which, by the way, what kind of operating system is that? It's a little... Yeah, it's a graphical with the command line still there. Okay? So where did they get it? Xerox. How do you think they got it from Xerox? Yeah, they basically Xerox, and we'll hear the story of Xerox in a little bit. Xerox was like, sorry, my bad. Xerox was crazy because they did not know what to do with this amazing technology that all these smart people created. So they said, there's this new upstart called Apple. Maybe they know. They can use some of this. I mean, really, is that crazy? We can look at it and say it's crazy, but from their time, they didn't know how to capitalize on this. Which, by the way, the name of this computer, can you see that? Lisa. Did anybody ever heard of the Lisa? No. It was actually a child that was born that Steve wasn't married to the mother, and it actually comes out in the stories. They end the stories of Jobs' life, but it was so funny because he kept denying that he had a daughter named Lisa, but then he named his first computer Lisa, and everybody's like, "What? Okay, we don't get it." So really, here's what happened, and here's the picture that depicts this, and this is actually an image from the movie. Here's Steve Jobs, Wozniak's over here. They're looking at the Xerox version of the graphical user interface, and can you see the expression on the woman's face? Disgust, because she did not want to show them because she knew what they were going to do. But Xerox said, no, you have to show that to them. So not only did they get to look at it, they actually got some of the basic beginning code of it, which gave them a huge head start. Okay? So you kind of get the feeling for who Apple is. And they were very creative people, no doubt about it. But where the graphical user interface came from is where? Xerox. Okay? So that's Apple. So, and by the way, here's some logos through the years, right? Check this out. I mean, really, this is just funny, right? I mean, it's so easy to look back at somebody else's work. We were talking about this earlier, right? And kind of laugh at it. Right? And this is cool, but this is where we're at today. Which, by the way, did you know Apple just released a new product yesterday? Yeah, the El Capitan, which is the latest version of Mac OS, came out yesterday. Okay? So, but again, these guys were doing great work. Again, they released the first graphical user interface. But let's talk about, for a minute here, this Xerox PARC company. So they created a lot of technology, those smart folks. One of the pieces of technology they created was the mouse. Because in order to use a graphical user interface, you have to be able to click. So not only did they create the mouse, right, and here's the image of the graphical user interface, right, but they created networking, they created some of the fundamental technologies that we use today. But again, and this image is actually from the movie, and you can't quite see it, but what they're doing is they're taking this mouse at the corporate office in Xerox, and they're passing it down the row, and it gets to the top executive. He's like, what will people, they won't want computers. Individuals won't want computers. So who already has denied that individuals won't want it? HP and Xerox. Again, if Xerox had realized what they had, we'd all be talking about Xerox instead of Windows today, or some product name they came up with, okay? So now we've talked about Apple, we've talked about Xerox, let's talk about Microsoft, right? So here's a really young, and again, not as young as the other one, but this is Paul Allen and Steve Jobs, really the two guys that quit Harvard. And here's why they quit Harvard. Was when they were at Harvard, this magazine came out, Popular Mechanics, and there was this Altair system, and it was basically one of the first computer kits that you could buy, but it had no software, none. So these guys got together and they created something called Visual Basic. And I think you can see it. I know at least the students online or in class. Can you see what that says? Basic. So Bill Gates, Paul Allen wrote BASIC, which, by the way, what kind of technology is it they wrote it on? Punch cards. And guess what they used to write it? Binary. Okay? So Visual Basic, huge impact, because suddenly people could take these kit computers right over here, these Altair computers, right? And they could write software and make it do stuff. Which, by the way, you're all going to write a Visual Basic program this semester. That's how much of a legacy that software was, okay? So they were making pretty good money, because what Microsoft, Bill Gates said is that I'm not going to sell you the language, I'm going to license it to you. And this is a key part of the story, is that Gates, smart, helped write this thing, really good businessman, okay? So, by the way, this is 1977. Look at the look on his face. Smiling, happy. And this is a mugshot. Yeah, so he was down in Albuquerque, Mexico. Again, he's working for this Altair company. Why do you think the guy was so happy? He was high. No, he wasn't high. Okay, not that I knew. I'm sorry. Don't have firsthand knowledge. He probably did have bail money, and this was like the 6th time he was pulled over. He loved to race cars, okay? And he was just like doing what he loved, right? This is a very common thing we see in the computer industry, man. Working 80 to 90 to 100 hours a week, having a great time, okay? So here's the other image when I was researching this that I found. Well, actually, is it here? Yeah. Let's do this one, and then we'll come back to this. Right? So what happened was Gates, because there's this other company we're going to talk about in a minute called IBM. And IBM was setting up to compete against who, you think? Apple. Okay? Because Apple was gaining market share. People were like, oh, I can buy a personal computer. Right? And these guys are like, and Altairs were starting to come out. And IBM, the big company's like, we can compete in this space. We know we can. So Bill Gates went to Microsoft and they said, you know what, we know you're going to compete against Apple, so we have something you need. You need an operating system for your IBM computers. And they're like, yeah, we do. How'd you know that? You know, he's a smart guy. So he sold the license to an operating system that he didn't have. And that's actually what this next chart was about right here. So in 1981, he bought from Seattle Computer Company something called QDOS that ended up later to become DOS for $25,000. How much money do you think he made from all the IBM sales for that one investment? Millions and millions and millions. Oh, and it still is, right? And now Bill Gates is one of the richest men in the world because of that decision right there. Because he decided to license it. So make sure you have that in your notes. He decided to license this thing he bought. He didn't sell it to them. He said, no, we're going to license it for each one. So ultimately, right, it still evolved through the years, right, from 81 to 87. He bought QDOS from Seattle, but then he licensed it to Microsoft for all their different versions of the Microsoft, or the IBM PC. Okay? So these guys are having a good time, making lots of money. And we're not even to Windows yet. Okay? So and again, this is a glamour shot, right? He's also, and by the way, he looks a little what here? He looks a little tired, right? And yeah, we assume tired, okay? And the truth was, the guy was working tons of hours. And the scene in the movie was they said, you got to do this, promotional shot. And he was just like, whatever, right? And this was him really not caring what anybody thought, because he was just interested in developing this technology. Does he? Macaulay Culkin? Okay. So who are the companies we've talked about so far? Apple? Xerox? Okay, so for a little bit, let's talk about, and by the way, who are the two characters here? Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. So there actually was a time when Bill was actually working with IBM, creating their, operating system, selling them BASIC, doing really well. And he approached Jobs. And this was during the time when Jobs was really getting the Apple ready to go out to market. And he said to him something that I suspect, if Steve Jobs was to tell the truth, haunted him for years to come. And he said this: I have a killer app. Now, in your notes, what do you think a killer app is? Something that kills you, right? No. An application so good, you will buy the hardware for it. Now, what app do you think Bill Gates told Steve Jobs he needed? Oh, no. Good. You're close. Spreadsheets. Because who would buy computers just to get spreadsheets? Businesses. And he's like, I can make a killer app spreadsheet for all your Mac computers. And Jobs was like, ooh. Because Jobs thought IBM was the big monolith, horrific company, which, by the way, you ever seen the commercial 1984 that came out during the Super Bowl? That commercial was really Steve Jobs saying IBM was the big, crazy master. We're going to overcome these guys. And if you haven't watched it, I definitely recommend you go get it. So what do you think happened here? Was that Jobs gave Gates the prototypes for the Mac so that they could build the killer app. What do you think Bill Gates did? He created Windows 1.0 because the Macs at the time were using the graphical interface they got from Xerox, and because Jobs gave him the prototype, which didn't have protected software on it, he was able to reverse engineer and create Windows 1.0. Now, what do you think happened? Lawsuit. Who won? Gates. Why did the court say that it wasn't a copyright infringement, which, by the way, wouldn't happen today, okay? There's a whole bunch that wouldn't happen today, was because this idea of a graphical user interface was like a steering wheel. You couldn't really license it. It was just something in a use case scenario. So, and by the way, this is, 1.0, this is Paint, right? Which, by the way, Windows 1.0, bad. Windows 2.0, bad. Windows 3.0, bad. Why were they so bad? Because they reverse engineered it. They had to look at the code. They couldn't use the code. They had to reverse engineer the code, and it was bad. And it took a lot of work. And Windows didn't get good until Windows XP, really. It was bad all the way through, and even today, it's not that good in some ways. No offense, Microsoft. But by the way, does that matter? Does it matter that it wasn't that good? Okay, so we're about to help you understand why, if you don't already. So, they were together, they did business. Where did Windows come from? Where did Windows come from? Where did Windows come from? It came from Apple, who got it from Xerox, okay? The idea of a graphical user interface and ultimately the code, because remember, because Xerox was the one who created it. And then they let Apple in the door. They took it, created a graphical user interface. Okay, so let's talk about IBM. So IBM created this thing called an IBM PC, which, by the way, when I was a little kid, when I was in college, my first computer was really a Mac, and my second computer was actually this almost exact model, okay? Yeah, it is that right down there. Thank you. I didn't even realize it. And by the way, what kind of OS is this? Which is command line. So when IBM released its IBM PC, they were not running Windows yet. Okay? So how well were these IBM PCs selling? No, really well. Who was buying them? Businesses. Again, that's how the killer app was promoted to Steve Jobs is because they knew businesses wanted the spreadsheets. So here's what happened though. Anybody know what this image means? Because do these say IBM on them? How did we go from IBM creating a computer to, and by the way, anybody know what this is called? They're called clones, or what we called compatibles. So how did people create this, take this and create that? And here's another arrogant big company bad decision. IBM was like, we are so smart, nobody will be able to figure out what we did. So we're just going to kind of tell them, because they'll never be able to figure it out. Duh. Who are some of these companies? HP. Anybody else know any of the clone makers? Dell, Compaq, Gateway, NEC, right? All of those were compatibles. They weren't PCs, IBM PCs, they were IBM compatibles. So again, think about here, Bill Gates. Why is Bill Gates way excited about the compatible market? Because he could sell more of them. Because let me tell you the price, what do you think the price difference between that and that is? Whoa. Yeah, right? And again, ultimately what ended up happening was Windows 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 came on these. Ready? Money, 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 money. Money. What? Oh, that's right. Xerox could have had it all. Whew. Yeah, they were too short-sighted. Which, by the way, is this kind of still what happens with big companies? Yeah, they make really bad decisions because they're so big, right? And this really does happen. This is not an isolated case. We could talk about bad decisions today. Okay, so who are our players? Apple, Microsoft, Xerox, IBM. And really this clone thing is a big one, okay? The one that nobody talks about. So, who won here? Who wants Linux? I wish that was true. Who won? Okay, let's look at this. So this is from 1975 to 2003. Do you see the Mac number? Yeah, you can't even really see it. But let's see. Well, you can. It's right here. Yeah. Yeah. Look, right, exactly. Exactly. The IBM just basically disappears. Right? The Apple, right, kind of does some good, okay stuff. Acer. But again, why are these companies at the top? Well, IBM is still there, right? We see them just basically drop here. Because, look who, remember this is the idea, right? That the clone market took off. People stopped buying IBM because it was so expensive. And even businesses were like, forget that noise. I can get the same thing for cheaper? Okay? So, interesting, right? Compaq, these are kind of the companies, the clone companies. The IBM compatibles. Yeah, that's HP. Okay? So HP were smart enough, even though they turned down Wozniak to create a computer for them back in the day, they eventually got on the market with the whole compatible thing. But here's the other piece of this story. So what happened is that clones really and Windows with its software beat everyone. Bless you. But let's look at this. This is an interesting chart from 1981 to 2015. The top line is Windows PC, so that involves all those clones. But look at the other two lines. iPhone, iPads, and Macintoshes. So really what happens, and by the way, this really did happen. This was an estimate, but this really did happen. What happened with unit cells? Yeah, so what surpassed? So iPhones surpassed, combined with iPads, surpassed PC cells. So who won? In this case, Apple, right? Okay, so what do you mean they're mobile devices? They're still unit cells. Oh. Okay, so don't assume here that people are buying one over the other. Most times, they're buying both. That's the reality. Is most people, if they have a full desktop, also have a tablet or a mobile device, right? But ultimately, there's a good margin right here. When we talk about margin, we talk about how much you're making versus how much it's costing you, which, by the way, how come Apple did such a great job of making money? Huh? They did. They did. There was a premium. And who makes most of the Macintosh or Apple products overseas? Yeah, but all the components. Yeah. So, but I don't want to get off on that because it'd be interesting to talk about. But here's the other thing, right? So this is the idea. Personal computers still went up. Smartphones and tablets. Again, there was no losers here. Even though Jobs was kicking himself for years that he let Bill Gates have the prototypes. Ultimately, he was still well off when he died. Well, and that's actually the other interesting thing that we'll end with. But let's at least talk about this, because this is what I'm trying to say, is that, if we look at over the course of a day, people are using multiple devices. And I know this is true for me, right? So it's kind of like at this late night, it could be any of them. It could be a laptop, it could be a PC, it could be a tablet. Right? Early in the morning, we see typically a little more PC starting to go up, right? Why is the PC kind of dominant during the day? Workday. Yeah, and they're at a desk. And what do we see prevalent at night? And why is that? Yeah, because most people, if they're home, want to be able to enjoy their family and be on technology. I don't know what's true for me, okay? So the point is that, right, they didn't lose. So what are the lessons that we got from this story? License everything. So cover your butt, that's good. Actually, here's the lessons I say, is the diversity helps a lot. Because the reason IBM compatibles did well is why? Why did they do well? The clone market. Because there was so many of them, there wasn't just one, because if you buy a Mac, you got to buy it from Apple. If you buy an iPhone, you got to buy it from Apple, generally, right? When you buy Windows computers, who can you buy them from? Right? So diversity generally wins. That's one of the lessons here. Now, where are we at today? Yeah, but whose fault is that? Xerox, right? They were smart enough to get the smartest people in a room, but then they weren't smart enough to say, maybe they were smart and we should listen to them. Geeks, this is the culture, right? So let's talk about today. What's the most popular operating system today? We already talked about this, but Android. Why is Android so freaking popular? Not every phone. That's right. They are. It's intuitive. Again, that idea of where the operating system's going is intuitive. But the idea of diversity in hardware. Because if you buy an iPad, an iPhone, you're only going to buy it from one company. If you buy an Android, you can buy it from a lot of different companies. So that's my lesson here to try to help you understand is diversity generally wins out, even in the long run, in nature and in business. Okay? Do you feel like you learned something today in this lecture? This is actually also my story. Huh? Oh, God. Are you kidding? Yeah, everybody's got drama, but nerds got a special version of it, right? Bill Gates is a freaking... And Bill Gates now is actually spending all his time to give away just the interest on his money. Yeah, do you know this? Well, you know. Okay. All right, so hopefully you got... Let's just end with this. Who created the graphical user interface? Xerox. Okay. Who got it first after Xerox? Apple. Who got it from Apple? And then how was this related to the IBM PC? Clones, right? The fact that we could have a lot of diverse hardware. And there was a lawsuit between who and who? And who won? Gates. Okay. All right. Actually, there was a meeting of them a couple of years ago where they sat down and, bygones be bygones. Both men were very, very rich, right? That's why my slide of who won, they both won. Nobody really lost in this case, except Xerox. Sorry. If there's a loser in this case, it was these guys. All right, let's show them and say goodbye. All right.